The Difficulty of Being Good, on the Subtle Art of Dharma, by Gurcharan Das, read by Pradeep Kumar.
Prelude. I take an academic holiday. What is here is found elsewhere. What is not here is nowhere. Mahabharata, I 56, 34, 35. In the spring of 2002, I decided to take an academic holiday. My wife thought it a strange resolve. She was familiar with our usual holidays when we armed ourselves with hats and blue guides and green guides and trudged up and down over piles of temple stones in faraway places like Khajuraho and Angkor Wat. She also knew of our visits to our beach house near Alibag when we went away with a dozen books and did nothing else but read. But she was puzzled at the prospect of an academic holiday. As she moved to get up from her chair, I hastened to explain. I had studied philosophy and read the great books of the West during college, but I had never read the classics of my own country. The closest I had come was to take Daniel Ingalls' Sanskrit classes at Harvard as an undergraduate. Now, 40 years later, I yearn to go back and read the texts of classical India, if not in the original, at least with a scholar of Sanskrit nearby. My wife gave me a skeptical look, and after a pause she said, "It's a little late in the day for a midlife crisis, isn't it?" I looked at her. She was still a handsome woman with extremely fine skin. "Why don't we go to the Turkish coast instead?" she added. After an absorbing career in multinational companies in 6 countries, I had taken early retirement at 50 to become a full-time writer. My wife and I had settled in Delhi, where I began to write a Sunday column for the Times of India and other newspapers. I traveled widely across the country in the 1990s, and from these travels emerged a book, India Unbound. In it, I wrote about India's economic rise and concluded that it was increasingly possible to believe that soon, perhaps for the first time in history, Indians would emerge from a struggle against want into an age when the large majority would be at ease. Prosperity had indeed begun to spread across India, but goodness had not. I was angered and troubled in early 2009 by a scandal that posed a challenge to our conception of worldly success. B. Ramalinga Raju had built through talent, skill, and dedication an outstanding and respected software company, and then committed the greatest fraud in Indian corporate history by swindling his company of rupees 7,136 crore. As a result, the public, both Indian and foreign investors, had lost around rupees 23,000 crore in the value of their shares, and the 50,000 employees of Satyam faced an uncertain future. I had met Raju 10 years earlier. I had looked him in the eye, and I had seen sincerity, competence, and great purpose. Soon after, I had run into one of his customers in the US, and she spoke glowingly about Satyam's dedication to quality, reliability, and integrity. There is no tribute greater than a satisfied, passionate customer, and it explained to my foggy mind, at least in part, why India had become the world's second fastest growing economy. Why should a person of such palpable achievement, who lacked nothing in life, turn to crime? What was the nature of moral failure in the case of the investment bankers on Wall Street who brought the world economy to its knees in 2008? Greed is too easy an answer. There must be more to it. I wondered if the Sanskrit epic, the Mahabharata, held any answers. The epic is obsessed with questions of right and wrong. It analyzes human failures constantly. Unlike the Greek epics, where the hero does something wrong and gets on with it, the action stops in the Mahabharata until every character has weighed in on the moral dilemma from every possible angle. In the Indian epic, harmony and happiness come to a society only through behavior based on dharma, a complex word that means variously virtue, duty, and law, but is chiefly concerned with doing the right thing. Would I be able to recover a meaningful ideal of civic virtue from India's foundational text? Moral failure pervaded our public life and hung over it like Delhi's smog. 1 out of 5 members of the Indian Parliament elected in 2004 had criminal charges against him. A survey by a Harvard professor had found that 1 out of every 4 teachers in government primary schools is absent and 1 out of 4 is simply not teaching. A World Bank study found that 2 out of 5 doctors do not show up at state primary health centers and that 69% of their medicines are stolen. A cycle rickshaw driver in Kanpur routinely pays 1/5 of his daily earnings in bribes to the police. A farmer cannot hope to get a clear title to his land without bribing a revenue official, and that too after a humiliating ordeal of countless visits to the revenue office. In despair, I watched teachers, once revered as gurus and moral guides, fail their students, and political leaders who had the duty to uphold the law become lawbreakers. The abuse of power is a routine matter in the world's largest democracy, and the entire political class has united in recent years in order to prevent political and electoral reform. It was an amazing spectacle to see the country turning middle class alongside the most appalling governance. In the midst of a booming private economy, Indians despair over the delivery of the simplest public goods. Social scientists think of governance failures as a problem of institutions, and the solution, they say, lies in changing the structure of incentives to enhance accountability. True, but these failings also have a moral dimension. When I announced my plan to spend the next few years reading the Mahabharata, my mother, who lived 400 kilometers away at her guru's ashram by the river Beas, reminded me that my restlessness was not inappropriate to the 3rd stage of the Hindu life. Called Vanaprastha, literally one who goes to the forest, such a person spends his time in reflection and searches for life's meaning. She said that I was suffering from Vanaprastha melancholy. In the classical Indian way of life, the 1st stage is Brahmacharya, the period of adolescence when one is a student and celibate. In the worldly 2nd stage, called Grahastha, householder, a person produces, procreates, provides security for the family while engaging in worldly pleasure. At the 3rd stage, one begins to disengage from worldly pursuits, and in the 4th and final stage, sannyasa, one renounces the world in quest of spiritual release from human bondage. My mother had commended my decision to take early retirement so that I might, as she put it, have a rich and prolonged 3rd stage. Now that I was speaking about Dharma and my restlessness, she insinuated that I had detached myself insufficiently from worldly concerns. While I was not expected to become a forest dweller, she felt that my mental makeup remained that of a lowly 2nd stage householder. I explained in my defense that I was attracted to the old idea of life's stages partly because the Dharma texts recognized the value of the 2nd stage, which was the indispensable material basis of civilization. It was important to remember this in a country that has long been mesmerized by the romantic figure of the renouncer, even before the Buddha came along. My mother, however, was spot on in recognizing my 3rd stage melancholy. During my second stage, I had felt as though I was waking up each morning, going to work and feeding my family, only to repeat it the following day, as my children would after me and their children after them.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?